Hi, I'm RobCosman. Welcome to my shop. The first time someone told me they had a drill press that would drill a square hole, thought they were joking, until I actually saw it. A hollow chisel mortiser, the best way to drill a lot of mortises. If you're interested, I'm going to walk you through the process of setting it up, sharpening it, and using it. Stay with us. I'm Rob Cosman, and welcome to my shop. We make it our job to help take your woodworking to the next level. If you're new and you haven't subscribed, please do so. Hit the notification bell so you'll receive alerts when we release a new video. And anytime we use a special tool, we'll always leave a description down below. All right, let's get to work. So this is called a hollow chisel mortiser. And this is actually probably the smallest example. If you look over here, I've got a much bigger foot-operated one that I'm in the process of restoring. But to be quite frank, I've used this for the last 35 years, and there's only been a few times that I've found it underpowered. So what it does, in a nutshell, it's a chisel, hence the hollow chisel. This one is 1/2 by 1/2, that has a drill in the middle. And as you apply downward pressure, this just barely clears the inside. So as this is drilling a hole, and you apply downward pressure, these points cut or establish the outside perimeter of the mortise, and as the material is pushed toward the middle, the drill carries it up and out, and that's the way it goes. So you've got a few adjustments. You can move your fence in and out. This is a guard or a hold fast that keeps your piece from pulling the board up with it. So when you make the cut, it's a very close fit actually. So when you go to bring this up out of the hole, if it wasn't being held down by this hold fast, then you'd have a hard time getting that out of there. You've got quite a bit of leverage in order to apply the amount of downward pressure. You've got a stop over here that prevents so that you can set how deep you want to go. And if you're not going to see the bottom of the mortise, I always cut it deeper than I have to, just to avoid having to clean up the very bottom. There's several different sizes. I've got, I guess I only have 3 for this, but you can buy others. So I've got 1/4, 3/8, and 1/2, which would be the most common sizes anyway. And the downside to this one is that it turns really fast. So the RPM is 3,450, but it's only a 1/2 horsepower motor. So you get using a 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch drill or chisel in a piece of hardwood, you're going to find some problems. However, for most work, in 3/4 size stock, we're using a 1/4 inch mortise. It works great. So let me walk you through exactly how to use it, what to look for, and more importantly, how to sharpen and maintain that chisel. So the first question to ask is, do you need one? Well, this is not very expensive. I think at the time I bought this, it wasn't more than $300. Doesn't take up a lot of floor space. In fact, this is just an extra stand, so all that you actually buy is from here up. It comes with the chisels, so there wasn't a huge expense. You can buy additional ones. If you're going to cut, if I was going to do one cabinet door, and I was going to chop and have mortises on all 4 corners, I probably would do it by hand. If I was going to do 3 or 4 doors, I could probably justify buying one of these. But remember, now this only does 1/2 of the joint. You've got to cut the tenon. But being able to go in and chop that mortise as fast as this works is a real plus. So I would consider this to be, if you're going to be building house furniture, I would invest in one of these without a second thought. There's lots of different brands. They're all about the same size. What you want to make sure is this, you want this head to travel on that big frame on the back, so there's very little run out. There's if you look on here, there's a gear inside of here, so you've got a toothed rail right there, and you've got a gear inside of here. You've got a long leverage arm, which is probably 16 inches long, so you get a lot of torque on that. You can adjust it so that you're always pulling in the most advantageous angle. You wouldn't want to have it sitting way down here, depending on how deep you're chopping. The fact that you can take some of the play out of it, if there is any, is a real plus. So you can't buy the Delta one anymore, I don't think, but I thought it was, of the ones that were available at the time I bought mine, I thought this was a good one. The fence, you can add whatever you need to the fence. It's not that difficult. The bigger models actually have a table that will move so that you chop and then the entire table moves instead of having to push this along. But I've never had a problem holding that just with hand pressure alone. There's nothing pushing it this way or that way. So as long as you can hold your thumb against this and squeeze it against the fence, I've never had an issue. In fact, one of the biggest jobs I ever did with this, I had a commission to replace all the dining hall furniture for a private school. It was seating for 200. So I made essentially 200 maple chairs, and there was 6 half by half inch wide by anywhere from 2 to 6 inch long mortises, and that was in hard maple. And I did it all with this, so it certainly would stand up to it. However, it was really aggravating when that little chisel would get jammed up and it would literally stall this motor. So if I was looking for a new one or another one today, I'd look at this horsepower rating and I'd want to get 3/4 horse or maybe even 1 horse. And I would sacrifice the RPM, that being 3,450. The other speed would be 1750. I would go down to 1750, which would give you a little more torque. You're spinning that fast with a 1/2 horsepower motor, you don't have a whole lot of torque. So that would be that's my only criticism as far as, I didn't show you in here, but you have a chuck key that allows you to release the chisel. You've got a set screw over here that allows you to release, the chuck key releases the drill bit. The Allen wrench releases the chisel. There's a fair bit to setting it up to getting it so that the sides of the chisel are either perpendicular to the fence or parallel, depending, measuring from the backside. I'll show you a couple of tips on how I did that. What else about it? As far as the adjustments down here, as long as it can be locked so that it's good and rigid and doesn't move, I don't think there's a whole lot else. So for an inexpensive hollow chisel mortiser, I think this was a good choice. I'm sure you can find them used. But this is a Delta model number 14650. Okay, I took everything apart. We're starting from scratch. We're going to build a door. Now we're going to put the frame together. So this is my stile. This is the part that runs vertically. This is my rail that runs horizontally. So the first thing we need to do is establish where we're going to put our joint. So just get some rough dimensions. So there's where the bottom of the rail is going to be. Now we want to have as much as possible, but if we get too close out here, we just don't have enough strength. So I'm going to suggest we're going to want to leave at least that much up on this end. So I'm going to put a line there, and we want a little bit of a shoulder. You never want to have the tenon going right into the mortise and having it right at the bottom of this rail, because the fit's not going to be there and you're going to see a bit of a gap. So you always want to have a bit of a shoulder, which means I would leave just about that much to allow to cover, for this to cover all the way around that mortise. So if this is the end of the rail, then let's come in right here. So we're going to run our mortise from this line to this line. So we're going to go over, we're going to set up the chisel, we're going to set up the fence, and we'll actually run this. And what we didn't determine yet is the depth, but we'll work on that in just a second. So the first thing I need to do is lock this in place and then put the drill in. But I want to make sure that that chisel is going to be, this back face is going to be parallel to the fence. If we don't, when we go ahead and we drill a series of holes, they could be off like this. I'm going to exaggerate it. Imagine having a bunch of square holes like that you're trying to create a nice big long mortise. You want one to overlap the next and have a nice continuous uninterrupted line on both sides. Your gluing face is going to be this one and this one. So the smoother that transition is between the chops, the better. And we're dealing with a very small chisel. And most of your work is going to be with a 1/4 inch. Certainly 85% of what you're going to do is in 3/4 stock. And if you're cutting a mortise in 3/4 stock, you're typically going to be cutting a 1/4 inch mortise, which gives you a 1/4 inch on either side of that. And that's your best bet for maintaining the maximum amount of strength out of the joint. So third, and a third. Okay, so what we're going to do is I want to somehow extend that. So I'm going to take a magnet and a steel rule. And I'm going to attach that, but I'm going to put this in first. And both have to go in at the same time. We just aren't going to set the drill up. Actually, we can actually we might be able to put that up afterwards, but sometimes they're too long, so I'm going to put it up in there right now. I'll just snug it up enough to hold it in place. Now, I want that shoulder to be right up tight. There's a lot of force in the chisel, so you don't want to have, there's a shoulder on this. You don't want to have that sitting down lower and allow that to move. So I'll put that in place. I'm going to bring this fence out, lock it. I'm going to bring this down. Got to get these up out of the way. Now, if that was big enough, you might be able to just put this up against the fence and tell, but I want to be a little more precise than that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach that like so, and then I can look down here, and I'm going to measure from the extremes of that rule. The fence is locked in place, so I know that's exactly where it's going to be, but we can tell that we're out of whack right now. So I'll do that by eye first. Okay, let's see what we got. So we've got 9/16 on that side. We've got a 1/2 inch on that side. So we got to move that just up. Oh, that's too much. Okay, that's just a strong 1/2 inch. And so is that. So there we go. Easiest way to do it. Lock that tight. And we can take this away. Okay, now if it drills out too far, it may wander. If it's up in too tight and it's rubbing against the chisel when it spins, it's going to create a lot of friction, and this thing will be blue in no time. So we want just enough clearance that we don't experience either one of those examples I just gave you. Now I'm going to loosen this up. Let that drop freely. So just got it jammed up in there. So there's where it's making contact. So I'm going to just drop that down a little bit. And I hate to be so imprecise in saying something like a little bit, but you'll get a feel for it. Okay, not making contact, not sticking down too far. I think that's probably good. So we'll snug that up. Good and tight. And we can close those. Now, let's determine how deep we want to go. The deeper the mortise, the weaker this is going to be because you're removing too much of the material. So I'm going to suggest that we go maybe right about there. So if we're going to go down that far, the problem is at the bottom, you're going to get a lot of mess. It doesn't cut a nice clean bottomed hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the chisel down probably to about there. And that's going to make it so all I have to do is take a mortise chisel and just give it a little scrape on the bottom to get rid of the loose stuff. But I will easily be able to have my tenon come in to this distance. Got a little extra room there for glue to get, and I won't have to, as I mentioned, go in and actually make that perfectly flat bottom. You got to remember, if you made a perfect flat bottom, and some people worry about this, what you're doing is you're gluing the end of the tenon to a long grain surface, but you've got an end grain surface going to a long grain surface. You're not gaining any glue strength whatsoever. So the only important glue surface is going to be the sides, the sides of the mortise and the sides of the tenon. That's where you want it to be a very close fit. So what I'll do is simply drop this down to that point right there. Now over here I've got a rod that runs up and down, and there's a set screw holding it. So I'm going to drop that till that rod touches the bottom and then lock it in place. Now I want good leverage when I'm applying downward pressure with this, so I'm going to move it up one notch. That means I'm going to be chopping like that. That's nice and convenient. Okay, next thing we want to do is we want to get this centered. So my first thing to do is come in here and establish the center. So this is 3/4 of an inch thick, so 3/8 of an inch is going to be my center point. So I'm going to use the point of the drill. I'll loosen the fence. I'm going to make a couple of guesses first. I'm not going to actually put it right on that dot, because once I mess it up, I won't be able to use it if I need to fine tune it. Now, in looking at that, I can tell that I need the fence to go back a little bit more. Best to snug that up each time, by the way. Okay, that's a lot closer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here away from that dot. I'm going to make a mark, and I'm going to turn this around so I'm referencing from the other side. I'm going to see if those 2 points line up. Yeah, that's close, but not quite. Got to move it back just a little tiny bit. Let's try that again. Okay, they went in the same hole, so I'm perfectly centered. Okay, now, as I mentioned, we want to keep this from popping up when we retract the chisel, so we want this, whatever you want to call it, this hold fast or hold down, to be sitting right on top. Need to be able to move it, so I'm going to come up just a little bit off of there. And by the way, if you need more capacity, I've taken this off, turned it around, and give you an extra ½ inch or so. Okay, I'm going to work this way. So I've got clearance underneath, very little room for that to move. You want to be really careful when you're doing this. You don't want that chisel and pulling it out to get yanked off sideways. It's easy to break. At the same time, you also have to be careful when you're doing your chops. You don't want to do a part of a hole. So here's what I mean. These are my two extremes. I'm going to actually draw a line on here so I can follow it. So I'm going from line to line. So what I prefer to do is make my first chop out here, make my next chop out here. So I've established my outside edges. I've got the wood all the way around the chisel, so there's no reason why that chisel is going to want to slide one way or the other. There's the same amount of resistance all the way around. If I were to make my next chop here, I would have wood pressure on this side, wood pressure on that side, wood pressure on this side. I have an opening here, and that chisel is going to want to follow the path of least resistance. It's going to have a tendency to want to wander off this way, and you run the risk of it not only creating an inaccurate hole, but it may very well bend over enough to break. So what we're going to do, I can just line that up by eye. Now, if you wanted to, and you had a lot of these to do, you could put some marks on here. I've added a wooden fence to the metal fence, so you could easily change that, but I can easily eyeball the side of that chisel with that line. I'm going to go all the way down. And by the way, this gets hot, and it's the shavings coming out of there that help to keep it cool. So you'll develop a feel for what the appropriate speed is, but you don't want to go too slow or it'll get cooked. Nor do you want to go too fast, because again, you're dealing with a small chisel You push it too fast, particularly in hardwood, you may have a tendency for it to run one way or the other. Now on this one, I'm eyeballing the right side of the chisel, lining it up with that line, and going down and making my chop. Now, I'm going to come so that I have a little bit less than a full chisel width away from this last hole. Make my cut. Same thing. Okay, this one, actually I'm going to split the difference. I'm going to go in the middle between there, and I'll show you why. Okay, so here's what I have. I've got 4 holes. Now I've got to get rid of this material in between. I want to make my next chop so that there's wood resistance on this side, wood resistance on that side, but there's no wood resistance on either the left or the right. So there's no reason for that chisel to want to wander one way or the other. I'm going to try to go right down the middle of that hole. Pardon me. I'm going to try to go right down the middle of that last section. Move it over and do the same thing. And one last one. Now, if this screeches on you, you know you've got that drill a little too tight, a little too far up into the chisel, and it's making contact. But that sounded and worked perfectly. Now, let's have a look at that. So you can see, for some reason, they can't seem to make these hollow chisels so that you get the drill is perfectly centered. You always seem to find that the drill is going to run out a little bit on one of the 3 outside edges of the chisel. In this case, it's running out a little bit more over here, whereas that's a nice clean side. So if you look down in there, that's a pretty clean mortise. There's a little bit of debris in there. Okay. So if you look really closely, you will see that there's some debris right here that didn't get cut. So I don't have a nice clean mortise all the way to the bottom. But that's all right because I purposely cut it deeper than what I need. My tenon is going to stop short of that little ridge right there. If I needed to, I'd go in with a chisel and clean it out. But I'm not losing anything by making it just a little bit deeper. So, lesson to be learned on this one. Cut a little bit deeper than you need. Most importantly is you've got to line that chisel up so it is perfectly parallel with your fence so that you don't get those overlap marks. Okay, let's sharpen the drill bit first, or at least look at it. So there's 3 things that you may need to fix. This is the cutting lip that does the cleaning out the bottom, so you're going to sharpen that surface right there if it needs. This is the lip that does the scoring on the outside, so you're going to sharpen that face right there if it needs. And that's the point that keeps everything centered. Hopefully you don't have to touch that, but if it gets damaged, it means going in and taking equal amounts off of those 3 sides to keep these edges nice and sharp, so they do a little bit of cutting, and to keep that center point on center. So most likely the only 2 that you're going to have to work with is this cutting lip out here and this scoring lip right there. So if you put this in a vise, I prefer not to use my bench vise, but I'm going to have to today. I always like to have some magnification so I can see what I'm doing. So you're going to want to file. I've got a safe edge right here, so I don't have to worry about cutting down in. And I always like to paint that. I'm going to do that again. If you paint it with a felt tip marker, then you know exactly where you've made contact. So I've got to lay that up against that lip. There's not a lot of surface area there, but I can tell where I'm making contact because it eats away the ink. Don't want to take off too much, but I want to get that outside edge clean. You never touch the outside. You always work on the inside. So now that feels sharp to the touch, so that's all I have to do. Now this one, I'll darken it as well. I don't do the bottom side. I'm going to do that top lip. So I put that in the vise. Again, come in here. I need to bend that down a little bit. Try to find where that's making contact. maintain that angle so that you're not having to establish a new one each time. And just come in and work that until this edge feels nice and sharp. And like I said, this is good, so it doesn't need it. If I had to, I would come in and have to do a little bit of work on this one, a little bit on that one, and a little bit on that one. Be careful where the rest of your file is touching so you're not screwing something else up. So that's how you maintain and sharpen, or keep sharp, your bits. Now, the hollow chisel. I've gone through before, and I've gone in and I have taken a, you can buy little grinding wheels that are, I wouldn't call it a wheel, that fit in a drill press. They fit in a drill, handheld drill, or they can even fit in a Dremel tool. And you can buy them to fit that shape, so when you put that in, it actually makes contact. You see, this one is too big, and this one is too small. But I found I never really needed to touch that. It's going to get scored from the drill bit anyway, and unless you've actually damaged it and created a really bad burr, there's no reason to go in and touch that. And you don't necessarily have to have one of these. If you did have a burr in there, you could go in, even if you had to just take a piece of wooden dowel and wrap some sandpaper around it, so you could go in and follow that radius just to clean up that lip. But what I would do is just spend a little bit of time. A diamond, I use a Trend diamond plate. It's almost indestructible. Actually, I need to have it sitting below. I've got to be able to keep this part below. And I would go in there and I would just do a little bit of work on each side of that chisel. And what that's going to do is create a nice sharp edge right up here, so that when that's being pressed, it's giving you a relatively clean surface, and it's doing a good job of pulling all those fibers into the middle. The drill pulls it up and out of the way, and you're good to go. Now, so buy a hollow chisel mortiser? Absolutely. Do you have to spend a lot of money on them? Not really. And if you want one just for hobby use, this has done me well in a commercial use, so certainly would satisfy anybody using it for a hobby basis. Hope this helps. If you like my work, if you like my style of teaching, click on any one of these videos to help take your woodworking to the next level. And I've always said, better tools make it a whole lot easier. If you click on the icon with the plane and the chisel, it'll take you to our website, introduce you to all of our tools, and also talk to you about our online and in-person workshops. Good luck in your woodwork.